There is a room beneath the Camp Nou. No windows, no noise from outside, just white tile, low benches, and the hum of an air conditioning unit that nobody hears anymore, because everybody in that room has trained their mind to hear something else. Footsteps in the tunnel, a crowd above stamping, a rival, close, closer than any rival should be. In that room, on a Saturday night in the spring, a small man sits alone at the end of the bench. His shin guards are already strapped in. His boots are already laced. He has nothing left to do with his hands, and so his hands do nothing. They rest on his knees. His eyes are fixed on a spot on the floor that means nothing to anyone else in the world. Around him, the room breathes. Men pace, men shout, men clap each other on the back and scream into the tiled walls to release something that has been building since Tuesday. This is the ritual of El Clásico. This is the hour before war. And in the middle of all that noise, Lionel Messi says nothing, clears throat. People mistake silence for calm. It rarely is. Sometimes silence is a held breath. Sometimes it is a closed door. And behind that door, something enormous is pacing back and forth, waiting for the moment it is allowed to move. Tonight, my friend, we are going behind that door, not to watch the goals, not to watch the trophies. We are here for the 90 seconds before the storm. The ones nobody puts on television, the ones that explain everything else. The room where nobody sees him, Barcelona's dressing room before a Clásico, is not like other dressing rooms. Players who have described it later, carefully, off the record, call it a place where the air itself feels heavier. The rivalry with Real Madrid is not a football rivalry. It is older than football. It carries the weight of two cities that have spent a century deciding they are not the same country, wrapped inside 90 minutes of sport. Every player who has ever pulled on that shirt has felt it, but few have carried it the way Lionel carried it. Because for Lionel, the weight was doubled. He was not just a Catalan symbol by adoption, he was a foreigner who became the symbol, a boy from Rosario who was told quietly by voices in Madrid that he did not belong to this rivalry at all, that the story was Real Madrid and Barcelona, Spaniard and Catalan, and he was simply a visitor standing in someone else's argument. He never said this hurt him. He never needed to. Sighs. The people closest to him noticed something instead. In the hour before a Clásico, Lionel disappeared into himself. Teammates who tried to make him laugh in the tunnel got nothing back. Coaches who tried to fire him up with words got a small nod and nothing more. He did not need speeches. He had already given the speech to himself, somewhere private, long before he ever walked into that room. By the time his boots were laced, the argument was over. He had already decided what he was going to do to answer it. Think about that for a moment. A man walks into the loudest, angriest room in football, surrounded by shouting and fists on lockers, and grown men screaming for blood. And he sits there like a stone in a river. The water rushes past him. He does not move. But make no mistake, my friend, underneath that stillness, the current was just as violent as anyone else's. It simply had nowhere visible to go. What the world called him for years, the story the world told about Lionel Messi and Real Madrid was a story about numbers. Goals scored at the Bernabéu, goals scored against Ronaldo, his great rival in another shirt, standing 60 meters away, pretending not to notice him. Failing, trophies lifted, records broken. It is easy to tell that story. It fits neatly into a highlight reel, 4 minutes long, set to music. But there is another story, sitting underneath the numbers, and it is a quieter, meaner one. It is the story of a stadium of 80,000 people who spent 15 years booing a man every single time he touched the ball on their turf. Whistles that started the moment his name was read out before kickoff and did not stop until the final whistle blew. Chants built specifically to needle him, built by people who had studied exactly what might make him flinch. In Madrid, this treatment was almost a badge of honor for the crowd. It meant they respected the danger, but respect delivered as 60,000 voices screaming at one man for 90 minutes does not always feel like respect from the inside of it. Lionel absorbed this the way he absorbed almost everything in his career, without visible complaint. He gave no interviews about being hated in that stadium. He wrote no statements. Journalists, who tried to draw him into a war of words, found a man who shrugged, said something short and polite, and moved on. This was read by many as evidence that none of it touched him, that he was above it. Machines do not feel whistles, clears throat. But listen closely to what happened on the pitch, my friend, because the pitch is where Lionel actually spoke. The answer he gave with his feet on the 23rd of April, 2017. Barcelona traveled to the Santiago Bernabéu for a Clásico that would help decide the league title. The match was chaos from the opening whistle. Real Madrid took the lead. Barcelona clawed it back. A player was sent off. The whistles from the crowd, aimed at Lionel specifically, rose and fell with every touch he took. A wave of noise crashing against him over and over across 90 minutes. In the final minute of stoppage time, with the score locked and the match seemingly heading for a draw that would have suited Madrid far more than Barcelona, the ball found its way to Lionel just outside the penalty area. He had been quiet for most of the second half by his own extraordinary standards, hunted by 3 defenders every time he received the ball, worn down by a stadium doing everything in its power to break his concentration. He took one touch. He shifted his balance. He struck the ball low and hard past the goalkeeper and into the net. The Bernabéu went silent, and then Lionel did something he almost never did. He did not simply raise his arms and run toward his teammates the way he had after hundreds of other goals. He ran toward the corner flag, pulled his shirt from his shorts, and held it up in front of the stand that had spent the entire match screaming at him. He said nothing. He needed to say nothing. His name was printed across the back of that shirt. And for one silent, suspended second, 80,000 people who had spent 90 minutes trying to erase him were forced to read it. Sighs. That is what 90 seconds of silence in a dressing room can build toward, my friend. Not a tantrum, not a shouted response, a single, precise, devastating answer, delivered in the exact language that would hurt the most. The cost nobody calculated here is what people rarely ask about that kind of restraint. What does it cost a person to carry 15 years of hostility without ever publicly releasing it? Those who worked closely with Lionel over the years have described carefully a man who needed long stretches of solitude before the biggest matches of his career, more than most players around him. Some team staff learned quietly not to approach him in the 2 hours before a Clásico kicked off, not because he was rude, because he was somewhere else entirely, running through something in his mind that none of them were invited into. A boy who left his home country at 13, who grew up mostly inside football clubs, rather than inside classrooms and childhood friendships, had learned early that emotion displayed in public could be used against you. Opponents studied your face for weakness. Journalists studied your face for headlines. The safest face, he seemed to decide very young, was the face that gave nothing away. But stillness is not the same thing as peace. A goalkeeper who trained alongside him for years once said something revealing, almost as an aside, that Lionel before a Clásico was somewhere you did not want to interrupt. Not angry in the way that shows itself in raised voices, angry in the way that shows itself in complete, terrifying focus. Think of a hurricane from a satellite photograph, my friend. From that distance, the eye of the storm looks like the calmest place on the entire map, a small circle of blue sky sitting in the middle of chaos. But anyone who has read about hurricanes knows the truth. The eye is not where the storm is absent. The eye is where the storm is most compressed, spinning at its highest pressure, held together by forces so strong that stillness is the only way they can survive without tearing themselves apart. Lionel Messi, 90 seconds before a Clásico, was the eye of his own storm. The insults he never answered with words. Over the years, this rivalry produced insults far beyond ordinary sporting trash talk. Rival players, in interviews, occasionally referred to him with a mocking diminutiveness, questioning whether a player so slight, so quiet off the pitch, truly deserved to be spoken of in the same breath as the legends of Spanish football. Some Madrid ultras unveiled banners before matches designed purely to provoke him personally, targeting not his football, but his character, his nationality, his very right to be considered one of them. He never responded to a single one of these provocations in a press conference. Not once, across more than a decade of this rivalry, did Lionel stand at a podium and fire back at an insult with an insult of his own. Teammates occasionally did it for him. Coaches occasionally did it for him. He simply absorbed it, filed it away somewhere behind that unreadable expression, and waited for the next 90 minutes, clear his throat. There is a particular kind of strength in that, my friend, and it is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is easy to mistake for weakness. It would have been so much easier, in the moment, to shout back, to match noise with noise. Instead, Lionel chose a harder path. He let the insult sit inside him, unanswered, until he could answer it in the only currency that could not be argued with afterward. A goal cannot be booed away once it is already in the net. A trophy cannot be shouted off a shelf once it is already sitting on it. This is why, when people who have studied him closely are asked to describe his relationship with Real Madrid across those years, so many of them use the same word, almost without meaning to. They call it quiet fury, not rage. Fury contained, refined, redirected, and finally released in 90-minute bursts that the entire footballing world would remember for decades. The locker room detail. Almost nobody noticed. There is a small detail from those years that rarely appears in any highlight package because it happened before the cameras were allowed inside. Several former teammates have mentioned it separately in different interviews years apart, almost as though comparing notes without realizing it. In the final minutes before Barcelona walked out for a Clásico, while the noise in the tunnel rose to a roar that could be felt through the concrete, Lionel would often be the last player still sitting. Not because he was slow to get ready. He was always ready first. He sat because everyone else needed to move, to release what they were feeling, and he did not. He needed the opposite. He needed to hold it exactly where it was until the whistle blew and he was finally allowed to let it go somewhere useful. Imagine, my friend, being handed permission to unleash 15 years of accumulated noise. accumulated whistles, accumulated insults about your right to belong, but only for 90 minutes at a time and only through your feet. No shouting allowed, no words allowed, just movement, precision, and the coldest kind of vengeance a sport has ever produced. That is the deal Lionel Messi made with himself, match after match, year after year, and he never once broke it in public. What the numbers cannot tell you. By the time Lionel left Barcelona in the summer of 2021, in a press conference that broke him in a completely different way, he had scored more goals in El Clásico than any player in the history of the fixture. 26 goals against Real Madrid across his career at the club, delivered inside one of the most hostile environments in world sport, against a rival that had spent over a decade telling him, in every way short of words on a page, that he did not belong in their story. The record books remember the number 26. They do not remember the 90 seconds before each of those matches, when a young man from Rosario sat perfectly still on a bench, hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on a spot on the floor, holding a storm inside himself so tightly that nobody outside that room ever fully understood what it cost him to keep it there. We like our heroes loud, my friend. We like them shouting, chest thumping, telling the world exactly how much they want it. Lionel Messi gave us almost none of that. And so for years, some people mistook his silence for coldness, for indifference, for a man who simply did not care as much as the ones who screamed. They were wrong. He cared enough to build an entire private ritual around containing it. He cared enough to sit alone in a room full of shouting men and let none of it show on his face, because showing it would have cost him something he was not willing to give away for free. He cared enough to save every whistle, every banner, every insult, and cash them in, one Clásico at a time, in the only language that could never be taken back once it was spoken. The question left on the bench, so here is what we are left with, my friend, as the whistle finally blows, and the door of that dressing room opens onto the tunnel, and the noise, and the 80,000 waiting voices. A small man rises from the bench. His face gives nothing away. He walks out into a stadium built, in part, to make him feel like he does not belong there. And for the next 90 minutes, he will spend everything he has been holding back to prove otherwise. Maybe you have sat in a room like that too, in your own way. Maybe you have felt the whistles of people who decided, long before they knew you, that you did not belong in their story. Maybe you have learned, the way Lionel learned, that the loudest response is not always the strongest one. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is sit still, say nothing, let the noise pass over them like weather, and wait for the one moment when they are finally allowed to answer. The ball does not care how loud the crowd was before kickoff. It only cares what you do with it once it arrives at your feet. 90 seconds pass, then the whistle blows. Then the storm is finally set free.